Rain hammered the windows of Trauma Room 3 as Manhattan disappeared behind the storm. Under the cold hospital lights, Dr. Scarlet Vale stood over a dying man and felt the floor vanish beneath her, 7 years ago. Luca Moretti had knelt before her in a penthouse and promised her forever. Then he disappeared, leaving her pregnant, humiliated, and alone. Now the man who broke her heart was bleeding out on her operating table. Her fingers trembled once, then instinct took over. She reached for her gloves, swallowed the past, and stepped toward him. The storm outside showed no sign of easing. Lightning flashed over the East River, while Dr. Scarlet Vale stood in the staff lounge, staring at a paper cup of coffee she could barely taste. Her fingers pressed into the cardboard until it bent. Anyone passing by would have seen a calm, brilliant surgeon. They would not have seen the exhaustion behind her eyes. When Dr. Angela Chen walked in and told her to go home after 16 brutal hours, Scarlet only shook her head. Her 7-year-old daughter had barely seen her awake all week. But Scarlet kept telling herself one more shift would not hurt. Scarlet said Elena was safe with the neighbor. Angela did not move. She had heard that answer too many times. Her voice softened, but the warning inside it stayed sharp. If Scarlet collapsed in surgery, someone could die. Maybe even Scarlet herself. Scarlet did not argue. She only poured more coffee and watched the black liquid steam in the cup. Angela asked why one of the best surgeons on the East Coast still lived like something was chasing her. Scarlet looked away. Because something was. A memory, a name. A man she had spent 7 years trying not to love. She had been running since the morning Luca Moretti vanished and left her in a cramped Brooklyn apartment with a child growing inside her. Scarlet kept that part of herself locked away, hidden behind long shifts and steady hands. She told Angela she was fine. The lie had barely left her mouth when Angela's pager screamed through the silence. Trauma alert. Multiple gunshot wounds to the chest. 3 minutes out. In an instant, Scarlet's exhaustion disappeared beneath adrenaline. She ran down the sterile hallway toward the one place where rules still made sense, where flesh could be repaired, bleeding could be stopped, and no one asked about old ghosts. The hospital snapped into motion. Nurses rushed past with crash carts, shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Sirens wailed somewhere beyond the storm. Scarlet pushed through the doors of Trauma Bay 3. Already cold and focused, she scrubbed fast, letting hot water sting her skin. A gunshot wound to the chest usually came from the city's darker corners. A deal gone wrong. A debt unpaid. A stranger left on wet pavement. None of that mattered now. On her table, every patient became the same thing. A body fighting to live. Behind her, the team waited. Scarlet lifted her hands and nodded. Metal instruments clicked into place. Scarlet snapped on her gloves just as the double doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in with a blood-soaked gurney, one of them squeezing a manual respirator in a desperate rhythm. The lead paramedic shouted the details. Male, mid-30s. Multiple gunshot wounds. Blood pressure 70/40 and falling fast. The team moved at once, cutting away the ruined fabric. Scarlet stepped forward, ready to take control. Then she saw his face. Her body went still. The noise around her dimmed. It was Luca Moretti. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The alarms, the nurses, the shouted numbers all blurred into a dull roar. Luca lay on the table, pale and soaked in blood. The same man who had once slipped a ring onto her finger beneath the Manhattan skyline. The same man who had vanished before she could tell him he was going to be a father. For 3 seconds, Scarlet could not breathe. Every instinct told her to walk away. Instead, her hand reached for the scalpel. Angela asked if she was all right. Scarlet nodded once. It was a lie, but the patient was dying. Anger burned through Scarlet's chest, sudden and ugly. Part of her wanted him to feel even a fraction of what he had left behind. But she was not that person. She had not survived 7 years just to become cruel, in the one room where she still knew who she was. She demanded his stats. A resident warned that his left lung was collapsing. Scarlet called for a chest tube, cut between his ribs, and pushed it in. Dark blood spilled out at once. Massive internal bleeding. She ordered them to move him to operating room 2. Angela gave the word, and the team broke into a run. As they raced through the corridor, Scarlett kept one hand pressed to Lucas' chest and forced her mind to stay clinical. She would not think about his smile. She would not remember the way he once held her face, like she was something precious. She would not picture the morning she woke to an empty bed, a short apology, and a ring she later sold to pay for medical school. None of that belonged here. Only the bleeding mattered. Only the next breath. They burst into operating room 2. Angela intubated him. Anesthesia flowed, and Scarlett held out her hand for the scalpel. The nurse placed the cold steel in Scarlett's palm. She took one breath and cut. The next 3 hours became a blur of blood, clamps, suction, and orders spoken too calmly. Lucas' body was a battlefield. 2 bullets had torn through his left lung. A third had shattered ribs near his heart. A fourth had nicked his aorta, leaving him minutes from death. Scarlett worked with brutal precision, but every glimpse of his face struck something raw inside her. 7 years had changed him. His skin carried new scars now. Old burns, knife marks, and the map of a violent life she had never been allowed to see. Questions clawed at her. What had he become? Who had done this to him? Had he ever thought of her? Even once, while she was raising their daughter alone. Scarlett buried every question and kept working. There was no room for grief with a man's life balanced under her hands. At last, the assistant confirmed the bleeding was controlled. They closed him layer by layer. When Scarlett tied the final knot, her fingers trembled from exhaustion, though her face stayed blank. She ordered him to the intensive care unit for constant monitoring, then left before anyone could see her break. In the empty waiting room, Lucas' blood still stained her sleeves. Scarlett sat alone under dim lights, unable to scream, unable to cry. The past felt too close, like a hand around her throat. Then her pager vibrated against her hip. Patient awake. She stared at the words, certain there had been a mistake. The anesthesia should have kept him under for hours, but Luca had always been stubborn enough to frighten death itself. She walked down the sterile hallway with a heaviness in her chest. When she opened his door, he was lying in a web of tubes and bandages. Eyes open, searching. His gaze found her. In a ruined whisper, he said her name. Scarlett stood beside the bed, hands clenched, every muscle locked. She told him he should be unconscious. Luca looked at her with the tired eyes of a man who had expected punishment and found mercy instead. He said dying would have been easier than facing her. Scarlett cut him off. Her mercy had ended at the operating room door. Then the words came out before she could stop them. How could he promise her forever and vanish like she meant nothing? Luca whispered that he had no choice. Scarlett laughed once, cold and broken. She told him he left her alone, terrified and pregnant. The word hit him harder than any bullet. Luca's face drained of color. For a few seconds, he only stared at her. Then he asked if she had really been pregnant back then. Scarlett nodded, and the room went terribly quiet. His voice cracked as he asked where the baby was. Scarlett gave him the answer without softening it. She was not a baby anymore. She was 7 years old, the exact number of years he had been gone. Luca tried to sit up, pain twisting his face. Scarlett pushed him back with one hand and told him not to mistake biology for fatherhood. He begged for her name. Scarlett turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Elena, she said. Scarlett told him Elena looked like him. Same gray eyes, same stubborn chin. Luca closed his eyes, and one tear escaped before he could hide it. Seeing him like that unsettled her more than his blood ever had. This was the man people feared, the man whispered about in back rooms, and he was crying over a daughter he had never held. He tried to apologize, but Scarlett would not let the words stand between them, like it could fix anything. Sorry did not cover 7 years. Sorry did not rock a feverish child at 3 a.m, or answer questions about a father who never came home. Luca finally told her the truth he had carried alone. Marco Duca, his father's most loyal rival, had sent him photographs of Scarlett sleeping. walking to work, buying groceries. The threat was clear. Disappear, or she dies. So Luca faked his death, cut every tie, and spent 7 years tearing apart Marco's network from the shadows. Scarlett wanted to call him a liar. She wanted the clean anger she had lived on for so long. But there was something in his face that made the lie impossible. She whispered that he should have trusted her. Luca said loving her had made him easy to hurt, and he had chosen her life over his own happiness. Scarlett did not know what to do with that truth. It did not erase the nights she cried alone. It did not give Elena a father at birthdays, school plays, or hospital fevers. Luca had fought his war in the dark, while she built a life out of exhaustion and stubbornness. Now she had to decide whether to tell her daughter that the father she had imagined was 20 floors above the lobby, barely alive. Luca asked if Elena knew anything about him. Scarlett said she had told her enough to protect her, not enough to invite danger, when she turned to leave. Luca begged for one chance to see his daughter. He said she could hate him. He just needed to see her face. Scarlett's first instinct was to say no. Elena had lived 7 years without Luca's blood-soaked world touching her. Scarlett had worked too hard to keep it that way, but the raw desperation in his eyes weakened something in her. She promised only that she would think about it, then left before he could ask for more. Instead of going home, she found the hospital chapel and sat in the dark until her breathing finally broke. For 7 years, she had survived by keeping everything locked down. Now one wounded man had cracked the door open. Her phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen had sent a message. Elena was asking when she would be home. Scarlett stared at the message, caught between the child waiting for her and the truth waiting upstairs. Then her pager shrieked. Code blue in the intensive care unit. For one stunned second, she could not move. Luca was crashing. Fear seized her before she had time to hate herself for feeling it. She ran through the corridors and burst into his room. Alarms screamed. A nurse was doing compressions. Another prepared the paddles. Luca's body lay too still beneath the white sheets. Scarlett pushed through the team and took control, her voice sharp enough to cut through the panic. Someone called clear, and the first shock hit his body. Nothing. They raised the charge and shocked him again. Still nothing. Scarlett's hand shook despite herself. She had spent 3 hours pulling him back from the edge. She would not lose him now. Not like this. Not before Elena even knew the truth. She ordered 300 joules. The room went tense. Scarlett touched his cold chest for the briefest moment, a silent command for him to stay. Then she stepped back. The shock fired. 3 seconds passed. Then one slow beep returned. Scarlett closed her eyes, and relief hit her so hard it almost looked like pain. Scarlett told herself she was only staying to monitor a critical patient. That was the professional answer, the safe answer. But by 3 in the morning, she sat in the break room with bitter coffee, a stale sandwich, and blood still drying on her scrubs. She had not called Elena. She had not gone home. When her phone vibrated, she already knew it was Mrs. Chen. The older woman's voice held no softness tonight. Elena had woken up crying. Saving lives was noble, but a child still needed her mother. Scarlett shut her eyes. She had been so busy trying not to fall apart that she had forgotten who was waiting in the dark. Guilt struck hard. Scarlett promised she would be home soon. Mrs. Chen did not accept it. She had heard the same promise yesterday. Scarlett tried to explain that the case was complicated, but the older woman saw through her. She asked if this was about the infamous gunshot victim everyone in the hospital was whispering about. Scarlett went silent. Mrs. Chen's answer was plain and painful. Elena did not care about complicated adult pain. She needed her mother beside her. Scarlett looked down at her stained hands and realized how much of Elena's childhood she had already asked the girl to understand. Scarlett promised to be home within the hour. Mrs. Chen warned that if she was not, she would bring Elena to the hospital herself. The call ended, leaving Scarlett in the quiet corridor. She threw away the cold coffee, then found herself walking back toward Lucas' room. One final check, she told herself. Nothing more. But when she saw his chest rising and falling under the machines, Her defenses weakened. He looked less like a feared mafia boss and more like the ghost of the life she had buried. She whispered that he had no right to come back after 7 years and tear open everything she had managed to survive. Luca was unconscious. But the confession came anyway. Scarlett admitted she had spent years hating him because hatred was easier than missing him. She had told herself Elena was better off without a father. Some days she had almost believed it. Then Luca appeared on her operating table, and every lie she had built around her heart cracked at once. She brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead before she could stop herself. The tenderness frightened her. She did not know how to protect Elena from him. She did not know how to protect herself. Then her pager buzzed with an urgent message from Angela's office, and Scarlett fled. Angela was waiting with crossed arms and a look that left no room for excuses. She told Scarlett to shut the door. Scarlett tried to say it had been a difficult case, but Angela did not let her hide there. In 6 years, she had seen Scarlett work through 30-hour shifts, impossible surgeries, and grieving families without losing her balance. Tonight, Scarlett had almost broken in the operating room, then spent hours watching one patient like her own life depended on his pulse. Angela asked who he was. Scarlett said he was someone she used to know. Angela's voice softened. Used to know. Or used to love. Angela told her she was emotionally compromised and should not be treating him. Scarlett snapped that she was fine. Angela did not flinch. She could see this man tearing something open in her. Scarlett was too tired to keep lying. She said his name. Luca Moretti. Elena's father. Angela froze. Then stood so quickly her chair slammed against the wall. She stared at Scarlett as if the room had shifted beneath them. The man who abandoned her pregnant 7 years ago was lying upstairs, and Scarlett had saved him. Scarlett said he was dying. Angela's answer was quiet and brutal. Someone else could have saved him. Angela paced the office, anger flashing through every step. Scarlett should have handed Luca to another surgeon the moment she recognized him. Instead, she had spent 3 hours putting back together the man who had destroyed her life. Scarlett stood motionless, hands shaking at her sides. When she finally spoke, the words came out raw. He left to protect me. Angela stopped pacing. Scarlett told her about Marco Duca, the photographs, the threats, the hidden war. She hated how close it sounded to an excuse, but she could not deny what she had seen in Luca's eyes. Angela was not convinced. Scarlett was not sure she was either. Scarlett's breath came unevenly. She asked how she was supposed to protect Elena from a man who had spent 7 years surrounded by blood and secrets. How could she tell her daughter that the father she dreamed about was upstairs with tubes in his chest? The worst part was the one she barely dared to say. Beneath the anger, some part of her still loved him. Angela stepped closer and placed both hands on Scarlett's shoulders. She said she did not know Luca, but she knew Scarlett. For 7 years. Every choice Scarlett made had been for Elena. Whatever came next had to be for her too. Not for Luca. Not for old love. For the child. Scarlett rushed toward the elevator. But another message from Mrs. Chen stopped her. Elena was still awake. Still waiting. Scarlett drove home through wet streets, heart pounding with every red light. The apartment was dim when she stepped inside. A small voice called. Mama Scarlett froze. Elena stood in the hallway in worn cat pajamas, curls tangled from sleep, gray eyes red from crying. She looked so much like Luca that Scarlett's chest hurt. Scarlett dropped to her knees and pulled her close. Elena clung to her neck and sobbed that she had missed her. Scarlett held her tighter, suddenly aware of every night she had asked this little girl to be brave. Scarlett murmured that she had patience to help, but Elena looked up with a sadness too big for her face. She said she needed her too. The words broke something in Scarlett. She carried Elena to the sofa and apologized until the child's breathing slowed. Then Elena lifted those sharp gray eyes again and asked the question Scarlett had dodged for years. Did she think her daddy was ever coming back? Scarlett went still. Usually, she answered with soft half-truths. Tonight, with Luca alive only 20 blocks away. Every lie felt heavier. When Elena asked if he was a firefighter, Scarlett could barely breathe. Scarlett took a careful breath and said his work was different. Elena asked what kind of work. The apartment felt too quiet. How could she explain a man like Luca to a child who still believed monsters only lived in books? She could not. So Scarlett said he was complicated. Elena's face fell. She asked if that meant he did not want her. Scarlett answered too quickly. Because the question cut too deep. No, he never knew about her. He had to leave suddenly. Before Scarlett could tell him. Elena stared into the dark, trying to make sense of a father who was real and absent at the same time. Elena looked up again, suddenly awake in a new way. If he knew about me, would he come back? Scarlett remembered Lucas' face when he heard the word pregnant. The shock that looked almost like grief. She whispered that she thought he would. Elena brightened at once. Then we have to tell him. Scarlett's stomach twisted. She tried to explain that his life was dangerous, that some people around him were not safe. Elena said she was not afraid. Scarlett pulled her close and admitted she was. Elena wrapped small arms around her mother's neck and whispered that Scarlett was the bravest person she knew. Scarlett wished that were true. Luca Moretti would not remain trapped in a hospital bed forever. Once he healed, he would look for answers, and the careful life Scarlett had built would begin to crack. She did not sleep that night. Elena breathed softly beside her while Scarlett stared at the ceiling, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for news that Luca had vanished again. But no call came. Dawn slipped gray and quiet through the window. Scarlett had made her decision. She would let Elena meet him, not because she trusted Luca, not because she had forgiven him, because Elena deserved more than stories and silence. 3 days passed in slow, punishing tension. Luca refused to die. His recovery stunned everyone, as if his body had learned long ago how to survive punishment. The bleeding stopped, and he was moved into a private room. Scarlett kept her distance, letting Angela handle updates whenever possible. But on the 4th day, a nurse found her with a message. He was asking for her. Scarlett stood there longer than she should have, then walked down the corridor before doubt could stop her. Luca was sitting upright, pale and hollow-eyed, yet still carrying that quiet command she remembered too well. When he looked at her, he said her name like a prayer. Scarlett closed the door behind her. The click sounded final. She asked why he had sent for her. Luca did not reach for excuses this time. He said he had been selfish. Wanting to see Elena had blinded him to what Scarlett had carried alone for years. Scarlett wanted to stay cold. She wanted the clean anger back. But his grief was too visible. And it irritated her how much that still mattered. She told him he could see Elena once. Under her rules. He would not tell her anything about his world. If Elena showed even the smallest sign of fear, the visit ended. If he disappeared again, he would never get another chance. Luca nodded to every condition. No argument. No attempt to bargain. Only gratitude so quiet it almost hurt to hear. Scarlett left before her face could betray her. That afternoon, she picked Elena up from school early. Elena climbed into the car full of chatter about drawings, spelling words, and a classmate who had eaten paste by accident. Scarlett smiled in all the right places, while her stomach knotted tighter with every block. When the hospital parking lot came into view, Elena's voice faded. Scarlett turned off the engine, took her daughter's small hands, and told her they were going to meet someone important. Elena asked if she knew this person. Scarlett answered, not yet holding her mother's hand. Elena walked through the lobby, quieter than usual. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt endless. Scarlett could feel Elena watching her, reading the tension she tried to hide. Outside Lucas' room, Elena asked if she was okay. Scarlett smiled and lied. Then she opened the door. Lucas stood by the window in a dark shirt, still pale but trying hard not to look weak. When he saw Elena, every trace of control left his face. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Elena whispered, "Who is he?" Scarlett said, "An old friend." Luca greeted her softly, careful not to frighten her. Elena stepped forward and studied him with the seriousness of a child trying to solve a secret. She asked how he knew her name. Luca said her mother had told him she was smart, brave, and loved to draw. Elena's face lit up. She told him about the dragon she had drawn the day before, the one with fire and blue wings. As she dug through her backpack, Luca looked at Scarlett. In that glance sat 7 years of birthdays missed, questions unanswered, and a tiny girl growing up without him. He wiped his eyes before Elena could turn back. Elena proudly unfolded the drawing and warned him not to laugh, because her mother could only draw hearts. Luca laughed anyway. Not at the picture, but at the sudden warmth of it. The sound was rusty, startled, almost unfamiliar. Scarlett watched his face change. For the next half hour, Elena filled the room with stories about school, animals, and how she planned to rescue every dog in the city when she grew up. Luca listened with complete attention. He asked questions. He remembered details. Scarlett stood near the door, aching with the unfairness of it. Her daughter had wanted a father for years, and Luca knew exactly how to become one in 30 minutes. When it was time to leave, Elena asked if he would be there tomorrow. Luca looked at Scarlett first, asking without words. She gave a slow nod. He promised he would. Then Elena suddenly threw her arms around his waist. Luca froze, stunned by the gift he did not deserve. For a few seconds, he did not seem to know what to do with his hands. Then he bent carefully and held her like she might disappear. Scarlett had to look away. Elena thanked him. Though for what? None of them could have said. As Scarlett led her out, fear moved through her like cold water. She had opened a door that would not easily close. That night, Scarlett paced her bedroom until her phone buzzed. A message from Luca. Thank you. Every sensible part of her told her not to answer. She answered anyway. Elena liked him. Luca replied almost instantly. Elena is perfect. Just like you. Scarlett stared at the screen too long before typing that the girl had his eyes. Luca wrote back, lucky her. Then he asked to see them again. Scarlett looked at Elena asleep beneath a crooked blanket and hated how simple the answer felt. Tomorrow, same time. 2 days later, Luca was discharged. Scarlett scheduled surgery to avoid him, but the procedure was cancelled, and fate placed him right in her path. Scarlett saw him near the elevator with a duffel bag over his shoulder. 3 broad men in expensive dark suits surrounded him, scanning the corridor as if danger could step out from behind any door. Luca looked up and found her, for a moment. Both of them stopped. One guard murmured that they needed to move. Luca ignored him and limped toward Scarlett. She asked if he was leaving. He said he had to go somewhere safe. Marco Duca's people had tracked him once already, and he would not let them track him to Elena. Scarlett's first thought was her daughter. Luca promised he would come back. Her answer was sharp before she could soften it. You said that 7 years ago. Luca flinched, but he did not look away. He said this time he had something worth coming back for. Scarlett's throat tightened. The guard urged him again, but Luca kept his eyes on her. He said he wanted to be part of their lives if she ever let him. Scarlett stood frozen, anger and longing pulling in opposite directions. He reached for her hand, not quite holding it, just brushing his fingers against hers. The touch startled her with its familiarity. Then his men pulled him away. Luca disappeared into the elevator, leaving Scarlett in the hallway with a heart that felt far less certain than it had the day before. 3 weeks passed. Luca called every night. Sometimes he listened while Elena told him about school, her drawings, and which rescue dog she would adopt first if Scarlett ever stopped saying no. Other nights, after Elena fell asleep, he spoke quietly with Scarlett. He never said where he was, but she could hear the weight in his voice. Elena was happy, and that happiness slowly wore down Scarlett's walls. Then one evening, while Scarlett was making dinner, her phone rang from an unknown number. She answered with one hand still on the stove. For several seconds, there was only breathing. Then a cold male voice said, "Dr. Vale." Scarlett went still. The man did not shout. He did not need to. He introduced himself as Marco Duca, the name Luca had tried to bury for 7 years. He said Luca had cost him a brother, a business, and half his empire. Now Luca had something worth losing. Scarlett heard the sauce begin to burn behind her, but she could not move. Marco said he had watched Elena leave school that afternoon. Then the line went dead. Scarlett ran to Elena's room. Her daughter sat on the floor with headphones on, drawing a dog with wings. Scarlett's phone rang again. "Luca," she answered, already shouting that Marco had found them. Luca changed instantly. His voice lost every trace of softness. He told Scarlett to grab Elena and get to a crowded public place. No questions. No packing beyond what she could carry. "Move now," Scarlett obeyed because fear left no room for pride. She pulled clothes into a bag while Elena asked what was wrong. Scarlett said they were taking a quick trip. Her hands shook too badly to zip the bag on the first try. 5 minutes later, they reached the front door. Then heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Too close. Scarlett pulled Elena back, locked them in the bedroom, and pushed her toward the window. The fire escape waited outside, slick with rain and 3 floors above the alley. It was dangerous, but the hallway was worse. Before Scarlett could get the window open, the front door exploded inward. Elena screamed. Scarlett grabbed a brass lamp with both hands and stood between her daughter and the bedroom door. The handle rattled. Her mouth went dry. Then gunfire ripped through the apartment. Wood splintered. Bullets tore through plaster. Elena sobbed into her hands. The bedroom door burst open. And Luca stood there in the smoke, blood on his shirt, gun in hand. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled them both against him. Luca whispered that they were safe, but the apartment around them said otherwise. The air smelled of gunpowder, dust and blood. Elena shook so hard her teeth chattered. Scarlett could not move. The living room where Elena had built blanket forts was now a battlefield. Luca touched Scarlett's face with stained hands and begged her to look at him. She did, but all she saw was the truth she had tried to ignore. Loving Luca did not just mean opening old wounds. It meant letting Marco Duca find his way to her door. Fresh blood speckled Luca's face, yet his voice remained controlled. That frightened Scarlett almost as much as the gunfire. He asked if they were hurt. Scarlett whispered that Elena was safe. For one brief second, relief cracked through him. Then the mask returned. He told them to stay low while he checked the hallway. Elena clung to Scarlett and asked why those men had guns. Scarlett had no answer a child could survive hearing. She only held her daughter tighter and kept her own body between Elena and the door. Out in the corridor, Luca barked orders in Italian, his voice hard enough to make strangers obey. Luca returned and they had to leave before the police arrived. Scarlett stared at him as if he had spoken another language. There were wounded men in her living room. Her daughter had almost been killed. Police were supposed to be the next step. But Luca's answer was cold and practical. Marco had contacts in places that should have been clean. Reports could leak. Names could surface. And the next attack would come before dawn. Scarlett wanted to argue. She wanted the world to still have rules. Instead, she looked at Elena's terrified face and nodded. Luca lifted the bag, took Scarlett's hand, and led them out through the ruins. They moved through the apartment fast. Scarlett forced herself not to look at the blood on the floor. Her eyes caught on the carpet instead. The simple gray one she had saved 2 years to buy. It was ruined now. A stupid thing to notice. But it nearly broke her. They hurried down the rear stairs to a black sedan waiting in the alley. Elena sat silent in the back seat, shock making her small and pale. Luca climbed in beside them and made rapid calls in Italian. His voice was low, controlled, deadly. Scarlett understood only pieces. Safe house. Dr. Marco. Clean route. Her old life was already being erased. When Luca ended the calls, he looked at Scarlett with apology written all over his face. She let out a laugh that had no humor in it. Men had just tried to kill them inside their home. He had promised they were safe. He had promised Marco had been weakened, cornered, almost finished. He had been wrong. Before he could answer, Elena whispered from the back seat, asking if they were going to die. Luca turned toward her and lowered himself to her eye level, as much as the moving car allowed. He promised no one would hurt her. Scarlett heard the iron in his voice, and hated that part of her wanted to believe him. They reached a fortified mansion in New Jersey before dawn. Security gates opened. Guards moved like shadows. and cameras watched every corner. It looked safer than any place Scarlett had ever entered. But her hands still would not stop shaking. Elena fell asleep on a velvet couch, one fist wrapped around Scarlett's sleeve. Luca stood by the window, staring into the dark. Scarlett approached him only after Elena's breathing steadied. She asked who Marco really was. Luca admitted the truth without looking at her. Marco Duca had once been his father's closest rival, a patient man who preferred pressure to noise. Luca had underestimated him once. He would not do it again. Scarlett's anger rose so fast it shook her. Her 7-year-old daughter had watched armed men break into their home. She had asked if she was going to die. That question would stay with Scarlett forever. Luca said he would give his life to undo it. Scarlett told him his life was not the point. His solution was already forming in his eyes. Find Marco. Kill him, end the threat. More blood to answer blood. Scarlett stepped back from him. She refused to raise Elena inside that cycle, always waiting for the next name, the next enemy, the next locked door. Luca looked wounded, but he did not deny it. When Luca reached for her, Scarlett stopped him with one look. She said she understood enough about his world now. Kill one threat, and another crawled out of the dark. There would always be someone owed a debt, someone grieving a brother, someone hungry for a crown. Luca sank to his knees before her. Not dramatic, just exhausted. He said his world was poison, but he had been born into it. Scarlett answered that people could still choose to walk away. Luca shook his head. In his world, walking away usually meant being carried out in a coffin, and now that he had Elena, he was not ready to die. Luca begged for one chance to fix what he had brought to their door. He said he would die before letting Elena be hurt. Scarlett's expression softened, but only for a moment. She pulled her hand from his and told him Elena did not need a father who knew how to die for her. She needed one who knew how to live for her. The words landed hard. Luca stood and turned toward the window. Silent, Scarlett carried Elena upstairs and laid her in bed. But sleep never came. Stay and the danger stayed with them. Run, and Marco might follow. Every choice felt like another way to fail her child. At 3 a.m, Scarlett's phone lit up with a message from Angela. She had heard about the destroyed apartment and wanted answers. Scarlett stared at the screen, then lied. Everything is fine. She hated how quickly the lie came. To protect Angela, she had to shut her out. By afternoon, Luca called a strategy meeting. Scarlett left Elena with Maria, a quiet guard with sharp eyes and a surprisingly gentle way of speaking to children. Then she followed Luca down into the basement. It was not a basement at all. It was a war room, humming with monitors, encrypted radios, and men who looked ready to vanish without asking why. On the largest screen, security footage showed a Queen's warehouse. Luca said Marco had been seen there 3 hours ago, moving money and men through the loading docks. He wanted to strike that night. Scarlett listened, then asked what happened after Marco died. Luca said Marco was the last person with the reach and obsession to keep coming after them. He showed her files, old photographs, bank records, names tied to shell companies, proof of the years he had spent dismantling his father, Empire, and Marcos' network together. Scarlett looked at the papers and wanted them to mean safety, but paper did not erase blood. Luca explained that Marco survived by being careful. He rarely touched a gun himself. He bought frightened men, quiet officials, desperate cousins, anyone useful enough to throw away. That made him harder to kill than the men who shouted loudest. Scarlett stared at the files. Part of her wanted to believe Luca had nearly ended this nightmare. Another part of her saw the gun on his hip and the guards waiting by the door. When she asked if he would come home after the strike, Luca went quiet. That silence told her more than his promises ever could. Scarlett's anger broke through. She asked if he was really going to disappear into the dark again and call it protection. Luca said his presence made them targets. Scarlett told him. Leaving was not protection if it left Elena with another empty chair and another story that did not make sense. He was making the same choice he had made 7 years ago, only now their daughter was old enough to feel it. The words hit him hard. Before he could respond, One of his men entered and said the team had to move. Luca asked for a moment alone. When the door closed, he looked at Scarlett and said she was right. Luca admitted he ran because he did not know how to live with the danger he brought. Scarlett's eyes filled with tears. She asked if his answer was really to live without them. When he whispered yes, she called him a coward. Not loudly. That made it worse. She said if Elena asked where her father went, she would tell the truth this time. He chose to leave. Again, and if he left now, he should not come back. Luca looked as if she had cut him open. Hours later, engines rumbled outside as his team left for Queens. Scarlett stood in the cold mansion, surrounded by guards, feeling more alone than she had in years. Around midnight, Scarlett's phone rang from an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then something made her answer. Marco Duca greeted her by name, calm enough to make her skin crawl. He told her Luca was walking into an empty warehouse in an easy ambush. Scarlett snapped that he was lying. Marco described Luca's route, the number of cars, the men sitting 2 blocks east with rifles on the rooftops. Details no stranger should know. Scarlett called Luca at once. It went straight to voicemail. When Marco came back on the line, she could hear his quiet satisfaction. Marco asked if she understood now. Scarlett demanded to know what he wanted. The bargain was simple. Scarlett and the little girl in exchange for Luca's life. If she refused, Luca would die before sunrise. Scarlett's mind raced. It was almost certainly a trap. But if it was not, could she live with doing nothing? She asked for proof. Marco said she would get none. Then he asked if she was willing to gamble Luca's life on pride. Scarlett closed her eyes, hating him, hating Luca, hating herself for still caring. She asked for the address. Marco gave her a Brooklyn location and 30 minutes. Scarlett woke Elena gently and told her they had to leave quietly. Elena rubbed her eyes and asked if it was another trip. Scarlett said yes because the truth would have frozen them both. They slipped downstairs. But Maria was waiting in the kitchen. She took one look at the bag and moved to block the door. Luca had left strict orders. No one was to leave. Scarlett said Luca was in danger. Maria's expression changed, but she still did not move. There was no time to explain. No time to convince her. Scarlett grabbed a heavy ceramic vase and brought it down. Maria collapsed. Elena screamed. Scarlett grabbed her daughter's hand and ran. In the freezing garage, Scarlett moved like someone outside her own body. She found the keys to a black SUV, shoved Elena into the back seat, and started the engine with shaking hands. The vehicle scraped hard against the security gate as it opened too slowly, metal screaming along the side before they broke into the dark road. Elena cried behind her, asking where they were going. Scarlett could not answer. By the time they reached the decaying Brooklyn factory, her throat tasted of fear. The building stood under the night sky like a dead thing. Scarlett killed the engine. Her phone rang at once. Marco's voice slid through the line. Good, you came. Marco ordered her to bring the girl to the loading dock. Scarlett gripped the wheel and demanded proof Luca was alive. Marco laughed softly. Then another voice broke through, hoarse and urgent. Luca, he shouted for her to run. The warehouse had never been the target. It was all bait to pull her and Elena out. Scarlett's stomach dropped. Marco took the phone back and told her she had 10 seconds before one of his men put a bullet in Luca's head. Scarlett heard a struggle. Then a gunshot cracked through the line. Elena screamed from the back seat. Scarlett opened the car door because fear had left her no other choice. Scarlett stepped into the cold, holding Elena tight against her side. Gravel crunched beneath their feet as they crossed toward the loading dock. Inside, the warehouse stretched wide and empty, smelling of oil, rust, and old rain. 6 armed men stepped from the shadows, weapons raised. Then Marco Duca appeared in a dark overcoat, neat, calm, and older than Scarlett expected. His face held no rage, only patience. Scarlett demanded to see Luca. Marco gestured toward the back. Luca knelt there, bound, bruised, and bleeding from the mouth. Marco said he wanted Luca to see the cost of taking everything from him. Marco raised his gun and aimed at Elena. Luca moved first. with a savage twist. He tore one wrist free and slammed his shoulder into the nearest guard. Gunfire exploded through the warehouse. Scarlett threw herself over Elena and dragged her behind a rusted support beam. The world became noise. Smoke, concrete dust, and Lucas' voice shouting orders through the chaos. His backup team forced its way through the side entrance, turning the ambush into a brutal firefight. Marco disappeared behind a line of his men, moving with cold purpose instead of panic. When the shooting thinned, he was gone. Only his warning remained. This was not finished. Luca ran to Scarlett and Elena, pulling them into his arms. He shook as he held them, whispering that he had almost lost them. But Scarlett could not return the embrace. Her eyes fixed on the blood across the concrete, on the gun in Luca's hand, on Elena's small fingers clutching her coat. She had brought her daughter into a killing ground because she thought she could save him. That realization turned her cold. Luca had not forced her to drive here, but his world had built the road. As long as Marco lived, and as long as Luca stood near them, violence would keep finding the door. Scarlett pulled away from him. Luca reached for her, but stopped when he saw her face. She told him she was taking Elena and leaving. Forever, Luca went still. He said he could move them to another safe house by morning, somewhere Marco would never find. Scarlett shook her head. There was no safe place in a life that depended on guards, lies, and men bleeding on concrete floors. She had crossed a line tonight that terrified her. She had risked her child for him. She would not do it again. Her voice broke when she asked him to let them go. Luca stared at Elena, then at Scarlett. Finally, he whispered, "Okay." He did not argue. That hurt more than Scarlett expected. She had prepared for rage, for command, for Luca Moretti to become the man everyone feared. Instead, he simply stepped aside. Scarlett gathered Elena into her arms and walked toward the exit without looking back. She knew one glance would ruin her. Outside, the night air hit her face, sharp and cold. She had lost Luca again, but this time she was the one leaving. She drove with no destination, only distance. In the rearview mirror, Elena slept with tear tracks still on her cheeks. Scarlett kept driving until the city lights disappeared behind them. They could not run far enough now. Marcaduca knew Luca Moretti had a daughter, and that knowledge could not be taken back. Scarlett's phone lit up again and again with Luca's name. She refused every call. Hearing his voice would weaken her, and weakness had nearly gotten Elena killed. By 4 a.m, she found a cash-only motel in Pennsylvania. The room smelled of mildew and old smoke. Scarlett tucked Elena into the narrow bed. The child looked up and asked if her father was coming. Scarlett lied gently and said no. Elena's lower lip trembled. Did he leave us again? Scarlett sat beside her and had no answer that did not hurt. Elena whispered that she missed him. Scarlett's heart broke in a quiet, private way. She missed him too. She missed the man he might have been, the father Elena had smiled at in the hospital, the wounded boy hidden somewhere beneath all that blood. But she could not say any of that. She stroked Elena's hair until the child fell asleep, then stared at her phone. 17 missed calls, 23 messages. One said, "Please talk to me." Another said, "Marco will not stop." Scarlett stared at those words for a long time. They sounded like a warning and a promise, and she hated that both might be true. Her fingers shook as she typed back, "Your world almost got our daughter killed." Luca answered at once, "My world is the only reason she is still alive." Scarlett closed her eyes. That was the trap of him. He was danger and protection in the same body. He begged for one chance to fix it. But Scarlett needed a father for Elena, not a warlord with enemies in every shadow. She told him there was nothing left to fix, turned off the phone, and slept badly beside her daughter. At dawn, violent pounding shook the thin motel door. Elena woke with a gasp. Scarlett reached for the lamp before she even stood. A voice outside called her name. Not Luca, Angela. Scarlett opened the door and found her friend furious, breathless, and soaked from the morning rain. Angela pushed inside before Scarlett could speak. She admitted she had slipped a GPS tracker onto Scarlett's phone months ago after too many missed calls and too many lies. Scarlett stared at her, betrayed and grateful at once. Angela listed everything Scarlett had done wrong. Fled a safe house. Assaulted a guard. Dragged a child across state lines. Scarlett snapped that she was protecting Elena. Angela shot back that fear was making Scarlett reckless. And reckless was not the same as safe. Scarlett tried to insist Luca had no place in their lives. But Angela would not let the story stay that simple. Luca had saved them more than once. Marco was the one hunting them, yes, but Scarlett's choices had also brought Elena into danger. That landed. Scarlett sat on the edge of the unmade bed and finally broke. She told Angela everything. The phone call, the trap, Maria on the floor, the warehouse, Marco's gun pointed at Elena. She had tried to be the hero and nearly destroyed the person she loved most. Angela sat beside her, anger fading into worry. They were alive, she said. That meant there was still time to choose better. Scarlett begged Angela to help her disappear for good. Angela looked around the damp motel room and told her the truth. This was not disappearing. This was panicking in a place with bad locks. Before Scarlett could answer, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. She had turned it back on only to call Angela. And now the darkness had found the signal. The message was short. Come back to New York alone, or your friend dies first. It was signed with one letter. Angela read it and went pale. Marco had followed the signal faster than either of them thought possible. Before anyone could move, the window cracked under a bullet and burst inward. Glass sprayed across the room. 2 more shots tore through the thin wall, shredding curtains, lamps, and the cheap painting above the bed. Scarlett threw herself over Elena and dragged her behind the mattress while Angela hit the floor. Then the gunfire stopped. A voice outside called for Dr. Vale. One of Marco's men said Angela would die first if Scarlett did not come out. Scarlett kissed Elena's trembling forehead and told her to stay down. Then she stood, raised her hands, and stepped into the open. 3 armed men waited near the ruined doorway. Marco was not with them. That made it worse. He had sent others to collect her, as if she were a package already paid for. The tallest man told Scarlett that Marco wanted Luca Moretti to watch his family disappear piece by piece. When one of them reached for Elena, Scarlett attacked with everything she had. She clawed, kicked, and bit until another man slammed her into the wall hard enough to blur her vision. Then the motel door burst open in a rush of smoke from a stun grenade. Luca stepped through with a gun raised and murder in his eyes. Luca fired before anyone else moved. 2 gunmen dropped with terrifying precision. The third grabbed Scarlett and pressed a pistol to her temple. Luca froze. The man ordered him to lower his weapon and said Marco wanted him alive long enough to suffer. For the first time, Scarlett heard Luca plead. He offered himself in exchange for her. The gunman laughed and told him that was exactly what made this useful. Scarlett felt the cold barrel against her skin and prepared for the shot. Then Angela, bleeding from a cut across her forehead, dragged herself across the floor. She grabbed a metal lamp with both hands and swung it into the gunman's skull. Scarlett broke free as Luca fired. The gunman fell. Another shot came from outside, through the broken window, aimed straight at Elena. Scarlett did not think. She moved. Her body covered her daughter just as the bullet struck. Pain tore through her chest, hot and brutal. She collapsed onto the carpet, Elena screaming beneath her. Luca roared and fired toward the window until the shooter vanished into the rain. Then he was beside Scarlett. Both hands pressed hard over the wound. He begged her to stay with him. Scarlett tried to answer, but her breath would not come. The last thing she saw was Elena reaching for her through Luca's arms. The first thing Scarlett noticed was the smell of antiseptic, then the steady beep of a heart monitor. She tried to move, and pain tore through her chest. A familiar voice told her to stay still. Luca sat beside the bed, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow, beard rough from days without sleep. When he saw her awake, he gripped her hand like he was afraid she would vanish. He told her Elena was safe. Angela was with her. Marco's shooter was dead. But Marco himself had slipped away again. Scarlett closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her temples. She had survived, but the fear had not left her body. Scarlett learned she had been unconscious for 3 days after a 7-hour surgery to repair her damaged lung. When she tried to apologize for running, for keeping Elena from him, for making everything worse. Luca stopped her gently. He said she had saved their daughter. Nothing else mattered. Tears filled his eyes as he admitted he had never truly let her go. She and Elena were not pieces of his old life. They were the only life he wanted. Scarlett looked at him and finally understood the cost of trying to carry every fear alone. It had not made Elena safer. It had only left Scarlett with no one beside her when the walls fell. Luca confessed what he had been too proud to say before. For 7 years, he believed he could destroy his father's empire and Marco's reach from a distance, then return only when the world was safe enough. But there was no clean finish line. A man like Marco did not need an army when he had patience, money, and a reason to hate. Staying away had not protected Scarlett. It had left her alone. If Luca wanted to protect his family now, he had to stand beside them, not disappear whenever fear sharpened its teeth. Scarlett studied him carefully. He was still the man who brought danger to her door, but he was also the father who shook when Elena cried. Scarlett agreed to let him back into their lives, but not as a shadow who appeared and vanished whenever blood was spilled. She gave him 3 conditions. No more lies. No decisions about Elena without her. And if he ever disappeared again, she would not wait, forgive, or explain him to their daughter. Luca accepted before she finished speaking. Scarlett believed he meant it, though belief still frightened her. He kissed her hand, careful of the tubes and wires. For the first time in 7 years, the silence between them did not feel empty. It felt unfinished, like something painful but still alive. 2 weeks later, Scarlett was discharged. Elena had visited every day, bringing drawings, stuffed animals, and dramatic updates about the hospital pudding. Luca stayed even longer, leaving only when nurses threatened to call security on him. In those quiet hours, Scarlett began to see pieces of the man she had once loved, the way he softened when Elena spoke, the way he listened without looking at his phone, the way he seemed almost afraid of being trusted. Marco was still out there, but the attack had shaken even his network. For a few days, the city went quiet. Scarlett wanted to believe quiet could become peace. The car did not take them to another remote safe house. It stopped at a secure apartment overlooking Central Park, the same building where Luca had proposed 7 years ago. Scarlett stood in the doorway, hit by memories she had not invited. Luca said he had kept the place for years, because he could not bear to let that version of them disappear completely. Now it had been reinforced, not turned into a fantasy fortress, but made practical. Stronger doors, security cameras, a safe room, guards who changed shifts quietly. He asked Scarlett and Elena to stay there while they planned the next move. Protection was everywhere. Trust was the part they still had to build. Inside the apartment, Luca asked for a chance to leave the blood behind. Scarlett watched him carefully. She still did not trust the easy version of that promise, but she saw the effort beneath it. The grief. The hunger to be more than the son of a violent man. Elena wandered through the rooms with wide eyes, asking if people really lived this high above the ground. Scarlett almost smiled. Then she turned to Luca and said one word. Stay. He closed his eyes as if the word had undone him. When he held her, it was not triumph. It was relief. That evening, after Elena fell asleep, they sat on the balcony and let the city breathe around them. Under the lights of Manhattan, Luca reached into his coat and took out a small velvet box worn soft at the edges. Inside was the same diamond ring Scarlett had sold years ago to pay for medical school. For a moment, she could not speak. Luca said he had searched for 2 years, through pawn shops, private sellers, and auction rooms, until he found it. He did not ask her to marry him that night. He only slid the ring onto her finger and said he wanted her to know he had never stopped choosing her, even when every choice he made had hurt her. Scarlett stared at the ring, and for once, anger was not the loudest thing in her chest. Their kiss was quiet, more fragile than passionate. It felt less like a happy ending than a promise to try. 3 days later, that fragile peace broke. Scarlett heard Luca shout from the study and ran in to find him pale, phone clenched in his hand. Marco had surfaced again. Not overseas. not in some distant hideout, but inside New York. Close enough to leave a message with one of Luca's old accountants. He had not been running from Luca. He had been waiting for Luca to gather everything he loved in one place. Luca threw the phone against the wall, then turned to Scarlett and whispered that Marco knew about the apartment. Scarlett felt the air leave the room. She had let Luca back in because she believed they were finally choosing honesty over panic. Now the darkness had a name, a face, and a plan. Luca said Marco did not want money anymore. He wanted bloodline. He wanted to prove Luca could not protect what mattered most. To Marco, Elena was not a child. She was the crack in Luca's armor. The one person who could make him careless. Scarlett's hands went cold. She asked what they were supposed to do. Luca looked at the monitor showing the street below and answered carefully. They would not run blind this time. The next morning, sunrise spilled gold over Manhattan, but the apartment felt airless. Scarlett woke to Luca's urgent voice from the office. She found him surrounded by guards and the blue glow of security monitors. His eyes stayed fixed on one screen while he spoke into the phone. How many? That was all he asked. Scarlett stood in the doorway, already bracing herself. She had learned to recognize the set of his shoulders when bad news arrived. This was worse than bad. Luca ended the call slowly, as if the phone had become heavy in his hand. 6 of Luca's men had been found dead at a warehouse in Brooklyn. Marco had left a message burned into a table. I know where she sleeps. Scarlett wanted Elena out of the city immediately. Luca stopped her. Watchers were already outside the building. 2 on the corner. 1 in a delivery van. 1 posing as a doorman in the building across the street. If they tried to move Elena now, they might lead Marco straight to her route. Luca had Angela coming, and a trusted crew ready to move Elena only once the watchers were drawn away. Scarlett hated that his logic made sense. Luca's plan was not to turn their home into a battlefield. It was to make Marco think they were still inside long enough to slip Elena through the service level with Angela. Scarlett recoiled when she heard the word decoy. Luca answered before she could accuse him. Elena would never be used as bait. He and Scarlett would be the distraction, the safe room, the cameras, the guards. Even the visible panic would be part of it. Every instinct in Scarlett told her to grab Elena and run herself, but running had failed them twice. With a shaking breath, she nodded. Luca ordered the building locked down and told someone to bring Angela in through the garage. 40 minutes later, Angela arrived with a medical kit, damp hair, and pure disbelief on her face. She looked around the apartment, at the guards, cameras and packed emergency bags, and asked if they had completely lost their minds. Luca said nothing. Scarlett told Angela she could still leave. No one would blame her. Angela gave her a furious look and asked who else was supposed to keep them alive after they made stupid decisions. Luca handed her a bulletproof vest. Angela stared at it, then put it on, while muttering every insult she knew under her breath. Her job was to take Elena down through the service elevator when Luca gave the signal. Angela asked what would happen to them. Luca said they would be right behind her. Nobody believed him. Angela went to wake Elena while Scarlett gathered herself enough to smile. She told her daughter they were going to play a quiet game. One where she had to stay close to Aunt Angela and do exactly what she said. Elena frowned, too smart not to hear the fear under the words. She said she wanted to stay with Scarlett. Scarlett knelt on the cold floor and held her face gently. She said grown-ups sometimes had to do scary things to keep children safe. Then she hugged Elena hard and watched Angela lead her toward the hall. The service elevator doors closed with Elena and Angela inside. The sound stayed in Scarlett's bones. Luca took her hand and asked if she was ready. Scarlett looked at the guards, the monitors, the empty hallway where her daughter had vanished, and whispered no. Then the building alarms began to pulse, not screaming, but steady and controlled. On the screens, Marco's men entered through the lobby with frightening confidence. They were not 12 masked soldiers now, only 4 men in work uniforms, carrying tool bags heavy enough to be weapons. One guard shouted that the front cameras had gone dark. Luca pressed a pistol into Scarlett's hands. She stared at it, horrified. I am a surgeon, she said, not a soldier. Luca answered that he knew exactly who she was. But if someone got past him, she needed to shoot low and run. Scarlett's hands shook around the weapon. Her whole life had been built around saving bodies, not stopping them. Luca showed her how to hold it. Fast and simple. Then pulled her behind the kitchen counter. He positioned his last guards without raising his voice. That calm frightened her. Before the elevator arrived, he looked at her with a fear she had never seen from him before. Not for himself, for her. Scarlett promised she would run when he told her to. Then the lock at the main door clicked. The door opened under a stolen access code. Luca's guards moved first, but Marco's men had come prepared. Gunfire cracked through the apartment. Short and controlled. Nothing like the wild chaos Scarlett had imagined. Glass broke. Plaster dust filled the air. Luca grabbed Scarlett's wrist and pulled her down the hallway, while one of his men held the attackers back. They reached the bedroom and locked the reinforced door. Luca shoved a dresser against it anyway. Scarlett demanded to know if Elena was clear. He checked his phone. No signal. The service elevator had stopped between floors. Her stomach dropped. Luca's face changed. Marco had planned for the escape route too. There was no time to panic. Luca opened a maintenance panel behind the wardrobe, revealing a narrow stairwell used by building staff. Scarlett stared at him, stunned that another exit had been hidden there all along. He said it led down to the service level, close to where the elevator had stopped. The bedroom door shook under a heavy blow. Scarlett climbed into the passage first, her injured chest burning with every movement. Luca followed, sealing the panel behind them just as the door gave way. They descended in darkness, one hand on the wall, the other gripping the gun she hoped she would not have to use. Somewhere below, Elena was trapped in a metal box. They reached the service level to find smoke drifting under the ceiling. Marco's men had set a small fire in the electrical room to force evacuation and blind the cameras. Scarlett coughed, eyes watering. Luca spotted the elevator doors and ran. Elena's voice came faintly from inside, calling for her mother. Scarlett nearly collapsed with relief. Luca and two guards pried the doors open far enough for Angela to push Elena through. Then a shot rang from the end of the corridor. A gunman raised his weapon again. Scarlett lifted the pistol with both hands and fired at his leg. He fell, screaming. She stared at what she had done. Shaking so hard, Luca had to pull her back. The fire alarm wailed overhead. Sprinklers burst to life, soaking the corridor and turning the smoke into a gray fog. Scarlett grabbed Elena and held her so tightly the child cried out. Luca shouted that they had to move before Marco's men found the service exit. They pushed through a utility door and down a rear stairwell, Angela limping beside them with one hand pressed to her ribs. Outside, an ambulance bay opened into rain and flashing emergency lights. For 1 second, Scarlett thought they had made it. Then a black sedan rolled slowly into view at the far end of the alley. Marco sat in the back seat, watching through the glass. Marco did not shoot. That was what made him terrifying. He simply looked at Luca, then at Scarlett, then at Elena in her arms, and lifted one hand in a quiet farewell before the sedan disappeared into traffic. Scarlett understood the message. He could have fired. He chose not to because fear was more useful alive. Luca wanted to chase him. Scarlett grabbed his sleeve and begged him not to leave them standing in the rain. For once, Luca stayed. Police and fire crews flooded the block, and Luca's people worked quickly to shape the story into an electrical fire. Scarlett barely heard any of it. She held Elena and counted each breath. The building was evacuated for hours. Elena sat wrapped in a rough blanket on the back of an ambulance, pale but alive. Scarlett knelt in front of her, checking her over again and again, even after the paramedic promised she was fine. Angela tried to joke that if anyone ever made her ride a stuck elevator again, she would start charging danger pay. Her voice shook. Luca approached slowly, as if afraid Elena might pull away. Instead, she asked if he had been scared too. The question broke through every piece of armor he had left. Luca dropped to his knees and pulled both Elena and Scarlett into his arms while the rain fell around them. For one brief moment, amid sirens, wet asphalt, and smoke rising from the service doors, they were simply a family that had survived. But Scarlett no longer mistook survival for safety. Marco was alive. He had chosen to let them see him. Chosen to remind them that walls and guards could fail. Luca knew it too. The police took statements that said almost nothing. Angela was treated for bruised ribs. Elena refused to let go of Scarlett's hand. By dawn, Luca moved them again. Not to some palace or hidden mansion, but to a quiet house deep in the woods where no one arrived without being seen first. In the days that followed, Elena played outside under careful watch and kept asking when they could go home. Scarlett had no answer. Home had become a place that could be entered with a stolen code and filled with smoke. Luca spent long hours on encrypted calls, but this time he did not hide what he was doing. He showed Scarlett names, routes, accounts, the patient web Marco had built around them. 3 weeks later, Luca returned from a meeting looking older than he had that morning. He said they had found the weak point, not Marco's men. His money. Luca did not solve it with a massacre. That mattered to Scarlett, more than he seemed to understand. He turned records over to the few federal agents his lawyers could quietly trust, exposed shell companies, bribed officials, and warehouses tied to Marco's name. There were arrests, seizures, frozen accounts, and yes, a few dead men when Marco fought back. But for the first time, Luca had chosen something other than a private war. Scarlett asked if Marco was truly finished. Luca looked toward the trees and said Marco had been arrested trying to cross into Canada. It was not a fairy tale ending, but it was real enough to breathe. Luca stepped closer and said the danger might never vanish completely, but Marco would not be reaching them from a cell anytime soon. Scarlett studied him. The scars, the tired eyes, the careful way he held himself around Elena, as if every small act mattered. He had missed 7 years, and no devotion could return them. But he was here now. She told him she believed he would die for them. Then she touched his chest and said she needed him to live for them instead. She wanted him there for homework, birthdays, bad dreams, ordinary dinners, and every quiet day he had once thought he did not deserve. Luca nodded. And this time, he understood. When the worst of the dust settled, Scarlett wanted only a life where Elena did not flinch at every sound. Luca listened without defending himself. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the ring again, the one he had found after years of searching. He said he was not trying to buy forgiveness. He knew no diamond could balance blood. But 7 years ago, he had asked her to marry a man who still believed he could control the darkness around him. Now he was asking as the man who had lost her, found her, failed her, and still wanted to spend whatever life remained making himself worthy of staying. Scarlett looked at the ring, then at Elena watching from the porch with hopeful eyes and said yes, not because the pain had vanished, because she was tired of letting pain make every choice. 6 months later, they stood in a small chapel by the Hudson River. There were no crowds, no cameras, no empire on display, only Angela, a few trusted friends, and Elena holding both their hands like she could keep them all steady. As the minister spoke, Scarlett remembered every moment that had nearly taken them from each other. She did not pretend the future would be easy. She only knew they had stopped running from it. At the reception, Elena claimed the first dance. She stood on Luca's shoes while he spun her slowly across the floor, careful and smiling in a way Scarlett had once thought she would never see. Scarlett watched from the edge of the room, one hand resting over the scar on her chest. Later, after Elena fell asleep with frosting on her cheek, Scarlett and Luca stepped onto the balcony. Luca asked if she regretted choosing this life with him. Scarlett thought of fear, blood, sleepless nights, and the child laughing inside. Then she shook her head. She did not regret him. She only hoped they would keep choosing better than the past had taught them. Luca rested his forehead against hers in the cool night. Scarlett understood then that love was not the clean, untouched thing she had once imagined. It could be bruised, stubborn, frightened, and still real. 2 years passed. Luca stood alone inside an empty Brooklyn warehouse, the last property tied to his father's criminal empire. For 24 months, he had dismantled every remaining operation, sold what could be made clean, and destroyed what could not. He did not burn it down in a grand gesture. He signed the final transfer papers, handed the keys to a nonprofit housing group, and walked out without looking back. Luca drove through quiet streets in Westchester and stopped at a modest house in a neighborhood where no one knew his old name with fear. Inside, the smell of pasta filled the kitchen. Scarlett turned from the stove when the door opened. She asked if it was finally over. Luca nodded. For a long moment. Neither of them spoke. The weight he had carried since childhood, the empire built on threats and blood, was gone. Scarlett asked how he felt. Luca looked through the window at Elena, laughing in the yard with their rescue dog. His answer was one word: free. Luca had learned what his father never did. Fear could build an empire, but it could not build a home. 5 years later, Scarlett stood under bright operating room lights, performing the kind of delicate cardiac surgery that had once brought Luca back into her life. The patient was a 15-year-old girl whose family could never have afforded the procedure. The Elena Vale Foundation paid for everything, funded by the last liquidated pieces of the old empire. More than 300 surgeries had been covered by then. Blood money had become beating hearts. After a 12-hour shift, Scarlett stepped outside and found Luca waiting, older, scarred, and finally calm. Luca asked how the surgery went. Scarlett smiled, and he knew the girl would live. They drove home through quiet streets with no convoy, no sirens, no shadows following close behind. Elena was 17 now, preparing for college and talking about becoming a surgeon like her mother. She had Luca's intense eyes and Scarlett's stubborn heart. Later on the porch beneath a clear night sky, Scarlett asked the question that still came back to her sometimes. Did he ever wonder what would have happened if she had let him die on that operating table? Luca was silent for a long time. Then he said yes. Every day. And every day. He was grateful she had not. Luca kissed her hair, and Scarlett leaned into him without fear. Home, she had learned, was never the penthouse, the cabin, or the quiet house in Westchester. It was the place they kept choosing to return to in each other. Their life was not perfect. Some nights still brought old nightmares. Some scars ached when the weather turned cold. But they no longer faced those moments alone. Luca had stepped out of the darkness not because it was easy, but because Elena and Scarlett had given him a reason to keep walking. And Scarlett, who once believed strength meant surviving alone, had learned that holding on could be its own kind of courage. Rain streaked the window, casting long shadows across a quiet room. The man who once ruled New York's underworld sat beneath the amber glow of a lamp, folding a child's old blanket with careful hands. Beside him stood the surgeon who had saved his life and nearly lost her own. The sharp edges she carried for 7 lonely years had softened, but they had not vanished. They had simply become part of her. Together they had walked through blood, fear, loss, and fire, only to discover that the only life worth keeping was not built on power. It was built in small rooms, around shared meals, with a child's laughter in the yard, and 2 people who kept choosing to stay.